My next guest wrote a book, which I highly recommend. I have read every single one of his books, and barring none, they are absolutely outstanding. And everything that he predicts in his books, not only is he an accurate reporter, everything that he talks about in his books, he's ahead of his own time. Because months later, what he reported in his books becomes the story. One of the most powerful independent journalists out there. It's Peter Schweizer. His new book, The Invisible Coup, How American Elites and Foreign Powers Use Immigration as a Weapon, joins us right now. Peter, thanks for being on the show.
Hey, great to be with you. Thanks for having me, Liz.
All right, Peter, your book is outstanding. I've read all your books. You know, we've talked about probably each one of your books as they've come out. I don't know how you time it, by the way. This book, the publication of this book was yesterday, if I'm not mistaken. And it could not have been more perfect timing than to examine what is the undercurrent, this immigration plot that we all talk about, flooding welfare and creating, overrepresentation of Democrats in Congress and creating a permanent class of new Democrat voters. You dug into exactly who's pulling the strings and orchestrating this, and the book came out yesterday. So tell us what you found.
Yeah, what I found is that, we've had this great debate in our country, an important one about immigration as it relates to jobs, violence in our streets, American culture. Hugely important, but I think we're missing the larger picture, which is the weaponization of immigration. And what do I mean by that? Foreign actors, that includes the government of China, the government of Mexico, the Muslim Brotherhood, see immigration as a weapon that they can deploy against the United States. And so when people come from overseas, they certainly bring themselves, their family, they bring their culture, but they also often bring political networks. And these are political networks that antithetical to the United States. So these foreign powers view immigration very differently than we do. Let me just, if I could, Liz, read you two quotes. These are from senior Mexican officials. It gives you an idea of their perspective on mass migration. The first one is from a government report in December of 2024 by one of President Sheinbaum's top aides. Quote, "We already know that the Mexican population in the United States reaches 39.9 million. We Mexicans are reclaiming our territory." Or this quote from a powerful senator. He's with the Morena party, the ruling party, and he's a member of the National Defense Committee, which is the most powerful committee in the Mexican Senate. He said just a couple of years ago on mass migration, quote, "Mexicans are in our territories: California, Nevada, Texas, Utah, New Mexico, Arizona, Kansas, Oklahoma, Colorado, and Wyoming. We're going to take back the territory that was stolen from us." Now, you could just say this is bravado, but as I argue in the book, and I think there's lots of evidence, they actually are trying to back this up. And China has their own methodology, and the Muslim Brotherhood have their own methodology. And they're all united in this sense that immigration is a means to subvert the United States. Those are not my words. I actually quote these people as saying that themselves.
Yeah, the part that I found fascinating is the quotes from these high-ranking officials in Mexico specifically. You could write off as just like, oh, some radical politician thinks that we're at war with the United States because, they didn't want to give up Texas or California or Nevada. And yet what you uncovered specifically at the Mexican consulates, not only, it's a plot, it's an orchestrated apparatus to do exactly what that public official in Mexico is claiming. So it's not a one-off. And I want you to explain that. The Mexican consulate thing is crazy.
Yeah, it's really amazing, Liz. I was surprised at this because, look, I admit I had the view that I think a lot of people have is the Mexican government is corrupt and kind of hapless. But the fact is they actually have erected a remarkable infrastructure inside the United States that is designed to create what they call Greater Mexico, these portions of the United States. So the first one are the consulates. Mexico has this vast network in the United States. The United Kingdom and China have respectively 6 and 7 consulates in America. Mexico has 53. And these consulates, as I point out in the book, they're involved in, organizing and supporting these violent protests that are occurring across the United States. They were neck deep involved in what was happening in Los Angeles last year. There's also a consulate up in St. Paul, Minnesota, the Twin Cities, where we're seeing so much in Minneapolis. So they're involved in organizing those. And I quote officials and explain how they are perpetuating those. But they're also involved in electoral politics, which you are not supposed to be doing if you are a diplomat in our country. So, for example, at the end of May in 2024, there was a meeting at the Mexican consulate in Oklahoma City. And Liz, they brought diplomats, consular officials from the consulates from Los Angeles to Orlando and pretty much everybody in between. They flew in officials, senior officials from Mexico City, from the foreign ministry, and they met with Democratic Party political activists. And the conversation was, we turned California from, red to blue. We turned Arizona from red to blue. How are we going to do that more in the United States so we can defeat Donald Trump? One of the officials said, Trump is going to learn that if you F around, you're going to find out. So there is absolutely no justification for Mexican diplomats to be involved in our politics. There are numerous other examples of things they're doing. So look, they're not performing a legitimate function. We need to look at closing some of these consulates because they are political activists. They're trying to extend the interests of Mexico into the United States. There's one other layer, if I could, Liz, to talk about, and that's that Mexico has created this really bizarre, this was shocking to me, this really bizarre network of elected officials. These are Mexican senators and members of the Mexican parliament who live in the United States. They serve
while
in the
they're
parliament.
elected officials in Mexico?
Yeah, they represent, they go and they meet in the Mexican Senate. They're senators, but they live in Los Angeles and they live in Arizona and they live in Illinois. And their job is to represent Mexicans inside the United States before the Mexican Senate. I mean, if that's not a subversion of your sovereignty, I don't know what is. And by the way, these guys are radicals. I mean, they are organizing protests. They say, they said during the Los Angeles riots, we are part of the permanent resistance. They say that Los Angeles was occupied territory, that it doesn't really belong to the United States. I mean, this is crazy. And so why we're allowing this to happen, I don't know. And I'm hoping that we're going to see some action from the Trump administration.
Yeah, this is completely bonkers. I mean, this is justification to close them all down and kick them all out, in my opinion. You mentioned the LA riots from last summer that were, the anti-ICE, supposedly, that's how they were billed. And yet we saw a bunch of foreign nationals wearing like terrorist keffiyehs. And, we were told it was peaceful. And we saw an awful lot of cars burning and roadways being blocked and officers being assaulted and precinct windows being broken. So we can tell what's peaceful and what's not. When you say they were involved in this, what do you mean?
They organized the protests. They cheered them on. They spread the word on social media. There's one member of the Mexican Chamber of Deputies, basically their Congress, who lives in Los Angeles, who was posting on social media when they were shutting down highways, when they were disrupting and harassing cops. He was posting, "Our race for our race." That's what he was saying. There's another Mexican deputy who lives in Ontario, California, which is just outside of Los Angeles, named Alejandro Robles. He is actually the representative for the Morena party, the ruling party of Mexico, in the United States. Last year, he was describing in detail to his colleagues back in Mexico, and I quote him extensively in the book, saying that he was going around the United States organizing the militancy. That's his words. Organizing the militancy inside the United States, and said that we, meaning migrants, are on the front lines of the resistance to the Trump administration. So this is what they are saying, and this is frankly what they're doing. In the case of this guy who says he's part of the permanent resistance, he actually was in New York meeting with organizations that are directly tied to Antifa. And plotting things that they could do together. So this all needs to be looked at. And yeah, people have a First Amendment right. If you're a foreign government official, I'm sorry, you do not have a right to do these things to try to cause chaos within the United States. That's why I think this needs serious investigation.
Well, nobody, even American citizens, has a First Amendment right to throw Molotov cocktails and assault police officers and break precinct windows either. Yeah. That is not peaceful protesting. That is not speech. And then in addition, tell me a little bit about the indoctrination efforts to make sure that the Mexican nationals or naturalized citizens, even here in the United States of Mexican origin, believe that the United States is evil. They have pretty serious indoctrination efforts going on, to my understanding.
Yeah, that's right. So, we have a lot of migrant children in the United States that came over here during the Biden administration or before that. Parents are illegally in the country. They are enrolled in schools, from California to Florida. They're going to public schools, and the public schools have these students that don't speak English. So the Mexican government and consulates, out of the kindness of their hearts, donate about 1 million textbooks a year to school districts in the United States. And these are textbooks that these students are learning from in our public schools. We actually looked at those textbooks, and look, I get it. A lot of the textbooks in the United States for American kids are bad. These are 10 times worse. These talk about that the United States is the enemy. And that they have a totally different view of the Mexican-American War and about the territories of the American Southwest. They're radical Marxist textbooks that have been donated by these Mexican consulates. I don't know if the local school districts in Orlando or in Los Angeles are paying attention or not, but this is the kind of indoctrination that's taking place. One other thing they're doing, Liz, is, and then again, this is funded by the Mexican government. It is organized and managed by the Mexican government. In 2024, they created something called Migrante TV, Migrant TV. This is a video news streaming service that the Mexican government set up specifically for migrants living inside the United States. And it is a propaganda arm. So in 2024, they ran all these stories about Kamala Harris was like the perfect leader for America, and Donald Trump was this horrible fascist dictator. When Trump won in November, from then until now, it has been a constant stream about how ICE and federal law enforcement and Customs and Border Patrol are brown shirts and fascists. This is what the Mexican government is telling migrants that live inside the United States. Why we are allowing them to do this is I don't know. I just can't figure out why we're allowing them to do this, why this hasn't been raised and said, you need to shut this down. Stop spreading this hate and this propaganda inside the United States.
As you point out in your book as well, and you've been making this point for years, actually, President Trump has a very powerful tool, almost an easy tool to encourage the Mexican government to comply, because you can tell us the number for the past year, but the amount of money that Mexicans in the United States send to Mexico is absolutely astronomical.
Yeah, it's one of their biggest sources of income. It's $60 billion with a B dollars every year.
Cow.
Yeah, these remittances. So they like the remittances, but they also like the fact that they are extending what they say their sovereignty inside the United States. And they believe if the trends continue, that states like California and Arizona and New Mexico will effectively become, whether they actually become Mexican states or not is another matter, but will effectively be run by them. And in fact, one of these migrant senators I was talking about, this is a Mexican senator who lives inside the United States in Arizona, Senator Ruiz. She's actually introduced legislation, supports legislation to make California a state of Mexico. So
that is so weird.
Yeah, these are the ambitions they have, and this is not just delusion. This is real stuff.
Yeah, that is really scary. And President Trump, to my understanding, and certainly the United States Congress could do this if they wanted, although I don't have much faith in the United States Congress, they could control the amount of remittances that's allowed to flow into Mexico and the Mexican government. I mean, that's a pretty powerful tool that the Mexican government to use to coerce the Mexican government, because they do rely on that. And I think you've been correct for a long time. You're one of the only people pointing that out. Talk to me about China and what they're doing to use immigration as a weapon.
Yeah, so China's methodology is different, as you might expect, Liz. It's very sophisticated, and it is their manipulation of so-called birthright citizenship in the United States. As you know, the Supreme Court's going to hear this case this spring. Birthright citizenship is the idea that, according to the 14th Amendment, the claim is if you happen to be in the United States and you're a woman that gives birth to a child, by virtue of being inside the United States, that child is granted automatic citizenship. And the problem is, Liz, we in the United States have zero idea how many babies have been granted citizenship this way, because the birth certificates that are issued don't list the nationality of the parents. So if you ask Department of Homeland Security, you ask any of the federal agencies, they will tell you we have zero idea how many babies are being born. Well, the Chinese government has looked at this and they have numbers and they are eye-popping. And just a little bit of background, the Chinese government, beginning in 2011, started running articles in the People's Daily, I quote them in the book, where they're telling Chinese elites, hey, if you travel to the United States with your pregnant wife, she gives birth to the United States, your child is going to get U.S. citizenship. They were encouraging this. They were disclosing this. And there's a massive industry in China, open in the public. They advertise all over Chinese social media saying, if you pay us $50,000, $60,000, we will take care of you. We'll fly you to the United States. We'll get you through customs. We'll arrange medical care. We'll get an apartment for you to stay in. Your child will be born. When your child's ready to travel, we'll get you back to China. So they've done this. So how many people are we talking about?
Yeah. What kind of numbers are we talking about here? Because I've heard of isolated incidents of this, kind of like the birth tourism, but what is the actual number?
Well, it's massive. It's like spring break tourism. The Chinese government says that every year for the past 13 years, every single year, roughly 100,000 Chinese babies have been born in the United States. That's the Chinese government estimate. So do the math. That's 1 million.
Oh, my word.
Chinese babies that were born in the United States who are taken back to China by their parents, raised in the CCP system. And by the way, when they turn 18, they're going to be able to vote in our elections. They're U.S. citizens. Oh, they're going to be able to donate to political campaigns. They're going to be able to apply for sensitive government jobs. And let's remember that 2016 presidential election, Trump, Hillary Clinton, it was settled by like 72,000 votes. So this is a massive, massive, massive vulnerability. And this wave is going to start cresting. Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. My mind is blown here. My mind, 1 million new voters that are essentially Chinese communists. I mean, it's not like they're going to vote. It's not like they're going to vote for Trump. It's not like they're going to vote the way that they want to. They're going to vote the way that the Chinese Communist Party tells them to. That could change the course of not just one election, but our entire country.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right, Liz. And let me just add one other component to this. And we don't have numbers for this. I don't think the numbers are as big, but they're significant. The added problem is this problem of surrogacy. So you have these companies in China that get wealthy, members of the CCP businessmen to hire American women to be surrogates to carry their children for them. So you'll have a Chinese billionaire who will pay an American woman $50,000 to be injected with their sperm, carry the child. The child is born. Then the child is picked up, oftentimes not by the parents, picked up by a third party and then returned back to China. We don't know how widespread this is, but the Wall Street Journal just 3 or 4 weeks ago had a front page story, Liz, about one man, a Chinese billionaire close to the CCP, who has over 100 children.
Are those American citizen children?
Yeah, 100 children born this way. And because they're born in the U.S. and the birth mother is an American citizen, the child is automatically granted citizenship. We did a little research, Liz. We found just in Southern California, 107 Chinese-owned surrogacy companies. So we don't know the scale of it, but that's an additional problem in this space.
That is crazy. Listen, I remember a couple months ago, and I forget I forget who published this. I forget what publication printed this. There was a story about a Chinese couple that were older than childbearing years, and they had a house full of like 20 or 25 children. Yep. And when Child Protective Services asked why they had so many children via surrogacy, they were just like, oh, we love children. And it was really weird and didn't seem to be at all reflective of the truth. Would that be part of this?
That's absolutely part of it. No, that's a great example. In that particular case, that gentleman is a high-ranking CCP official who's originally from the Uyghur region in China. Oh. He has, probably $100 million of real estate in the United States, but primarily lives in China. He had, according to health and welfare people that showed up at this compound, he had 26 children there. From ages of like 2 to 3 up to age 12. And they were all his. And by the way, they're all U.S. citizens that he can take back to China whenever he wants, but they're going to have the right to vote. They're going to have the right to do a whole host of things. So this is what we mean by weaponized immigration. They are exploiting our immigration system and manipulating it in a way that creates a very real national security threat.
Yeah, I mean, if you have 1 million voters essentially captured because they're going to be indoctrinated by the CCP. They're going to be coerced. If they vote absentee, they're not filling out their own ballots over there. You have essentially captured U.S. elections. Like, you're going to be running the country just based on those. If you spread out those votes into, geographical locations where they will tip the scales, you've taken over the country.
That's right. And look, there's a lot of states where all you need to do is establish residency by having a local address, and you can do it as little as a week before an election. So you could decide, and this has been found in a couple of places, you could have an apartment where you have 15, maybe 20 foreign nationals claiming that as their residence, and they can vote in an election if they have U.S. citizenship. So it's a huge problem. It's an electoral challenge, but it's also a challenge to this issue of the birthright citizenship. That's why I think it's so vital that the Supreme Court is taking this up. I have reason to believe that there are briefs being filed with the Supreme Court. They're going to be talking about the research in my book, raising this issue, because again, people think, somebody's here on vacation and they're pregnant and they happen to give birth and okay, what's the big harm? That's not the problem. It is widespread, wide scale, industrial in terms of what the Chinese are doing.
I think you're watching in real time my mind being changed about an issue, because I was always on the birthright citizenship issue. I was always like, okay, well, whether or not you agree with that, that's what's written in the Constitution. So if you want to change the Constitution, change it. But there are ways to do that. Don't try to twist the words and pretend they mean something else. Like, it is what it is. And I think you've changed my mind on this. I mean, if this is something that is being, not just can be, not just vulnerable to, but if it is being actively weaponized to take over our country, then we have to stop it. We have to change it. It has to end.
Yeah, I mean, Liz, I think, part of it will come down to, I'm not an attorney, so I'm just going to give that caveat, but part of it comes down to this issue of under the jurisdiction thereof, right? That people are granted birthright citizenship under the jurisdiction thereof. And the question is, if you are a Chinese couple that flies into the United States for 3 weeks, a week before she gives birth, and 2 weeks later you fly back to China and the child doesn't live here at all, ever, until they're 18 and they decide to activate that person, is that person really subject to the jurisdiction of the United States? I think common sense would say no, they're not. So why would that person be granted citizenship? But we'll see what the legal arguments are. But I'm similar to you. I kind of assume that this was not a wide scale problem. It absolutely is. It's being exploited by the Chinese. There are other people that are certainly aware of this. There are other services that provide this for Indian couples, for Russian couples, fly them in. It's called birth tourism. And the tourism industry in that space, at least, is booming.
Yeah. And I think I just didn't realize the extent of it. I thought it was something that a few elites here and there did, and it wasn't right. But man, as a weapon, an immigration weapon, talk to me about, this is actually an American citizen who is residing in Shanghai, China. I assume having been given permission by the Chinese Communist Party, because you can't just, you or I, Peter, couldn't just go to China and live there if we wanted to. We would have to be given permission. The person that I'm talking about is Neville Roy Singham, this American citizen who is an avowed communist. He loves the Chinese communists. He shares an office with the Chinese communist propaganda firm. He's been cited at their propaganda conferences carrying a red notebook with a hammer and a sickle on it. He was part of, radical, actually black communist and Marxist groups here in the United States before he fled. We exposed him last summer as being one of the big funders, indirectly through this kind of nebulous web of innocuously named leftist groups. One of the big funders of the violent riots that we've seen in the United States, whether it's on college campuses, in the name of pro-Hamas, quote unquote, free Palestine, Students for Justice in Palestine funds, whether it's the Party of Socialism and Liberation, a big organizer out in the LA area for those riots. But talk to me about what you have reported additionally on him in this book, because I know my audience, we were among the first to be talking about him. So they're very eager for the new information that you're bringing.
Yeah, well, thank you, Liz, and you've done great reporting on this issue. I first ran into Roy Singham when I was researching my previous book, Blood Money, and we actually put him on the cover. And people would say, I recognize all these people except this guy. And I said, well, that's Neville Roy Singham. And I explained who he is, and you've done that as well. I mean, this is a guy who built a tech firm in the United States. He was an avowed Marxist, which is kind of weird that you're a Marxist and a businessman. But anyway, he was. He sold that business to an investment fund in London and made $1 billion personally off of that deal. What's interesting about the investment firm that bought him, they bought his company, by the way, is that investment firm is partly owned by China's sovereign wealth fund, which is their government investment fund. So Neville Roy Singham now has $1 billion. He decides, I'm going to go live in Shanghai. That's where I want to live. Anywhere on the planet I can live, I'm going to go and live in Shanghai. He does. He's friendly with the CCP. He's funneled more than $100 million into a network that includes a group called the People's Forum in New York. Now, you remember earlier, Liz, I was talking about this Mexican member of Congress who said he was organizing the militancy and meeting and speaking to groups. He actually went and spoke at the People's Forum in New York about the ability of migrants from Mexico to work jointly with radicals like Antifa. So there is a kind of a merging of interests here. And you're quite right. Singham favors violent radical change in the United States. And he's done it overseas in other countries where, he's been identified as a national security threat, like India, for example. So this is a real problem. And again, it shows how immigration has been weaponized, because the breeding ground for a lot of these radical movements. Yes, in Minneapolis, we see, the 50-year-old lady, blowing her whistle, and we see the radicals. But a big part of this movement are immigrants, and they have been radicalized in their home countries. They come to the United States, and in the United States, their goal is to continue to spread and to perpetuate the revolution. That's why we need to have an absolute vigorous process of vetting people that we even allow to come here on a visa. Because when you look at, for example, some of the religion visas, the R1 visas, particularly in the Islamic space, the vast majority of radical imams that are preaching at mosques in the United States, they're not Americans. They come here on these R1 visas, and they talk about going to war against Western civilization. They talk about tearing down the United States. And we've got to get smart about this, or we are going to be looking ultimately, I think, at the collapse of the United States in the not too distant future. It's going to get that bad.
Listen, and meanwhile, while radical imams are coming here and preaching the downfall of our country, Catholic priests who are coming here as missionaries are being sent back to their home countries because they can't get their visas renewed. The system is completely messed up. Listen, Peter, I don't know if I ever told you this before. I might have told you the last time we spoke. I think the last time we saw each other was at that Heritage event a couple years ago.
Yes.
And we did that interview on stage. And I forget if I told you this or not, but something that you do in your books has served as an inspiration for something I've done in my books now, which is at the very end to prescribe a solution to the problems that you expose. And I've always thought that you have done that very well, because you don't take an entire half book to do that. You just say, listen, this is the intricacy of the problem, and here's how it can easily be fixed. And I think that's one of the reasons, beside your reporting, why your books are such effective. It's not just a message, it's actually a political change that you are affecting here. And so I know you have to go quickly. I'm going to keep you for an extra 2 minutes because I want to hear what government officials should do about the weaponization of our immigration system.
Well, thank you for those kind words, Liz. And I've always admired your work on the podcast and in your books. The solutions are simple. Now, some of them require congressional action, which is not so simple. But among the things I talk about is we need to end the practice of dual citizenship. You need to be an American citizen. You should not be an American and a Chinese citizen, or American and a Mexican citizen. I think it's a question of where is your heart, where is your commitment. So that's one of the things I call for. The other thing I call for is a radical overhaul of our visa system and the way that we use it. We have a problem with people getting quote unquote permanent resident status in the United States by buying their way into the country through the EB-5 program. Many of these people are manipulating our system. If they get permanent resident status, they can donate to political campaigns. They're doing that to try to shift the base in this country. So we need to overhaul the visa program, and I discuss how to do that. The third thing we need to do is stop doing stupid things. I mean, one of the things I mentioned in the book is we right now in the United States are training hundreds of Chinese pilots at private flight schools, some of whom are going to be flying for the People's Liberation Army Air Force, squaring off against our pilots. That's ridiculous. I thought we learned from 9/11. We don't want adversarial people in our flight schools. So that should be a quick fix as well. But there are things we can do. I would tell people, don't get overwhelmed with the problems we face. They are real. They are massive, but there are solutions, and you've got to have faith that there is a path forward. And I believe that there is.
Again, your books are some of my favorites of all time. I never miss one of them. Guys, go get Peter Schweizer's new book. We'll put the cover on the screen for you one more time. Peter, I could talk to you for hours. I know you're a busy man. It's book launch week, so we're going to let you go. But thank you for being on the show. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
Thanks so much for having me, Liz. Take care.
Of course. Okay, guys, The Invisible Coup by Peter Schweizer was out yesterday. How American elites and foreign powers use immigration as a weapon. It's really mind-blowing. Really, truly mind-blowing to hear how coordinated of an apparatus the Mexican government has, using their consulates to actually coordinate the domestic civil unrest in our country. And then this Chinese plot to use birth tourism and surrogacy to create new American citizens that aren't really Americans. They're just born here. They get birthright citizenship. They are taken back to Chinese mainland, indoctrinated into communists. Then when they turn 18, they are deployed to vote to take over our elections. It is shocking.